Imagine waking up in a world where you just swallow a supercomputer,
Right. Yeah.
like one the size of a single human blood cell just to eradicate a nascent cancer, all while, a bipedal humanoid robot mows your lawn.
Oh, and your personal digital assistant is busy renegotiating your salary.
Exactly. Based on surplus value you didn't even actually generate. I mean, that doesn't sound like a Tuesday morning. It sounds like a frantic science fiction pitch.
Yeah, it really does.
But looking at the sheer volume of data, the corporate filings, and the laboratory breakthroughs we are parsing today, that isn't science fiction at all. It is a highly conservative forecast for the next 15 years.
It's completely wild, but yes.
Today's show is an inspiring celebration of impossible ideas and the minds brave enough to chase them down. After an attention-arresting teaser, launch your discussion with the CTA to subscribe and select the ringing bell. Finding passengers bold enough to embark on our good ship's journey is harder than most people think. So drop a very humane thumbs up right now to send a signal flare to drifting knowledge pirates like yourself. We know they're out there. Let's bring them home. We're keeping it lighthearted, as usual, but we promise to never skimp on the intelligence. Now, let's kick off this voyage with today's new revelations.
What really is just an unprecedented stack of intelligence to sort through today,
Oh, absolutely.
When you lay all these distinct data points out on a single table, the corporate maneuvering in aerospace, the legal battles over machine intelligence, the factory production rates of physical robots, and the clinical trials in longevity medicine, you realize we aren't just looking at isolated industry updates.
Right, they're connected.
Exactly. We are looking at, the architectural blueprints for a completely new phase of human evolution.
That is exactly what struck me when I started reading through this for you guys. We're looking at a series of massive, high-stakes gambles that the data refers to as moonshots.
Literal moonshots in some cases.
Yeah, literally. And we're using that word in its most extreme sense. These are leaps that entirely defy normal economic or biological logic. I mean, we have a corporate entity tying a $500 billion payout to the colonization of Mars.
Which is just staggering.
And then we have a vicious multi-billion-dollar legal war to control artificial general intelligence. We are tracking companies churning out humanoid machines at really staggering rates, geneticists actively reconstructing extinct animals, and pharmaceutical trials that suggest human aging might actually be a solvable engineering problem.
Right. And what ties all of these seemingly disparate fields together is a singular, overarching meta-trend.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So we are witnessing the rapid and, frankly, quite volatile transition of our species. Because for 300,000 years, human civilization has been entirely defined by biological limitations and material scarcity.
Right, there's only so much food, so much energy, so much time.
Exactly. Everything we have built, our economies, our laws, our daily routines, is predicated on the idea that human energy is finite and resources are scarce. These moonshots represent the violent tearing down of that old framework to build a post-scarcity, technologically supercharged civilization.
Wow.
Yeah. We are quite literally rewriting the base operating system of humanity.
But, to rewrite an operating system that massive, you can't just use a normal company. You need a completely different kind of corporate vehicle to even attempt it.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's dig into the economics of the impossible, or what we might call the Moonshot Corporation. Because the financial structures required to build this future are just as radical as the technology itself.
Yeah, the financial mechanisms here completely break the traditional models of corporate governance. I mean, if you study how a standard Fortune 500 company operates, the board of directors is legally and culturally bound to a very specific mandate.
Which is usually just making money, right?
Right. Specifically to maximize steady, predictable profit for the shareholders, usually measured in 90-day quarterly increments. They are fundamentally designed to mitigate risk.
Yeah, I feel like traditional boards are basically like a committee trying to paint a masterpiece.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, they might produce something perfectly safe, something that looks nice in a corporate lobby, but it's going to be incredibly boring. A Moonshot Corporation, on the other hand, operates more like a pirate captain burning the ships on the shore, so the crew has absolutely no choice but to push inland and conquer the island.
Exactly. And the data we have on SpaceX is the ultimate manifestation of this.
Yeah, let's talk about that because this blew my mind.
The compensation package designed by the SpaceX board for Elon Musk is, it's unparalleled in corporate history. We're looking at a structure involving 200 million supervoting shares.
Okay, let's clarify what that means for a second, because a super voting share isn't just, a regular stock you trade on an app.
Right, no. A standard share gives you one vote in the direction of the company. A supervoting share, in this specific instance, means Musk's single vote counts 10 times more than a regular shareholder's vote.
10 to 1. That's huge.
It essentially guarantees absolute dictatorial control over the company's trajectory, regardless of how much capital outside investors pump into it. But the truly staggering element isn't just the control, it's the trigger mechanism for the payout.
Yeah, this is the part that melted my brain. The shares don't trigger if he increases revenue by 20%.
Right, not at all.
They don't trigger if he successfully lands a new contract with NASA or sends a few highly trained astronauts to orbit. The metric required to unlock this package is the establishment of a 1 million person Mars colony.
A literal colony.
A functioning, self-sustaining civilization on another planet, coupled with a $7.5 trillion market valuation for the company itself.
And if those metrics are achieved, the personal payout to Musk sits in the neighborhood of $500 billion.
$500 billion. With a T. I mean, if I'm an institutional investor, someone managing pension funds or massive endowments, why on earth would I ever hand a single founder that much unilateral control?
It seems crazy from the outside.
And why would I agree to a payout that could fund a medium-sized country? It sounds completely reckless to me.
Well, it sounds reckless if you are using the math of a linear organization. To understand the logic of the investor here, we have to look at the concept of the exponential organization, often abbreviated as an EXO.
Okay, an EXO.
And at the heart of every EXO is something called an MTP, a massive transformative purpose.
How does that differ from a standard corporate mission statement, though? Because every company has a plaque in the lobby saying they want to change the world.
Sure, but a standard corporate mission statement is usually a linear goal masquerading as vision. A linear company aims for 5%, maybe 10% growth year over year. If you run a logistics company, your goal is to deliver packages 5% faster or 5% cheaper next year. If a founder walked into a traditional boardroom and pitched a linear business plan, the board could easily manage that using standard metrics.
Because they're used to it.
Exactly. Human brains are fundamentally wired to think linearly. We extrapolate the future based on a straight line from the past. But an exponential organization isn't trying to grow by 10%. It is aiming for a 10x, 100x, or even a 1000x impact.
Wow.
Yeah, because the underlying technology they are leveraging, whether it is reusable rocketry, machine learning, or genomic sequencing, is compounding exponentially.
So if a founder pitches an exponential goal to a linear board, the board's immune system basically attacks it.
Precisely. If a founder says, I want to put 1 million people on Mars, a traditional board will look at the quarterly capital expenditure, look at the risk of catastrophic failure, and vote it down immediately.
Too risky.
Way too risky. They would say it is too capital intensive and too far outside the core competencies of generating a return this year. The massive transformative purpose is essentially a psychological and structural hack to bypass that linear thinking.
There is a brilliant case study in the material about TED that illustrates this perfectly, actually. Not the technology side, but the organizational side of exponential growth.
Oh, the TEDx example, yes. It's the quintessential example of an MTP in action. If you look back at the origins of those community-driven events, the traditional linear approach would have been disastrous.
How so?
Imagine the leader of TED standing in front of his core team in a boardroom and saying, our strategic plan is to organize and execute 20,000 global events over the next 5 years.
The logistics team would walk out of the room. It's impossible. I mean, if you take a linear approach, you hire event planners, you do 5 events in the first quarter, you learn some lessons, you hire more people, you do 10 events the next quarter. If everything goes perfectly, maybe after 5 years of grinding linear growth, you have a massive staff and you've pulled off 2,500 events, which is a huge success by traditional metrics, sure.
It is a success, but it is not a moonshot. It is constrained by the central bottleneck of the organization's own labor. But TED didn't do that. They utilized a massive transformative purpose.
Ideas worth spreading.
Incredibly simple.
Yeah.
Ideas worth spreading. They didn't try to manage the logistics centrally. They created a set of open source rules, a framework of quality control, and then they handed the entire concept over to the global community to self-organize.
So they remove themselves as the central bottleneck.
Exactly. And because they let the community organically replicate the model, they didn't hit 2,500 events. They hit 20,000.
That is just wild.
That is the power of the MTP. When the goal is seemingly impossible, you cannot manage it with traditional linear metrics, and you cannot incentivize it with traditional linear compensation.
So back to Musk's payout.
Right. If an investor is willing to sign off on a $500 billion payout for a single founder, it is because the value created to trigger that payout, a $7.5 trillion enterprise, and the actual realization of a multiplanetary human civilization, makes every single person on that cap table astronomically wealthy.
Yeah, at that point, the $500 billion is irrelevant compared to the total value of the pie being created.
Exactly. You are financially rewarding the successful engineering of the impossible.
Think about what that implies for your own life or your own career right now, you know? Are you operating on a linear track? Are you aiming for that safe, predictable 5% bump in your salary or your company's revenue?
It's a tough question.
It really is. Or do you have an NPP? Are you building a structural moonshot that leverages exponential tools? Because the gap between those two approaches is widening every single day.
It is a complete paradigm shift in how we organize capital and human effort. But, as the data also vividly illustrates, while this dictatorial moonshot structure works incredibly well, when the founder and the mission are in absolute lockstep alignment, like we see with Musk and the physical rockets at SpaceX, it can create absolute chaos when the trajectory of the moonshot shifts,
Oh, yeah.
or when the underlying philosophy of the project comes into question.
Which is the perfect pivot into the battle for the future of intelligence itself, because we have a story of a founder utilizing ultimate control to build rockets. But now we have to look at a situation where a founder lost control of the trajectory.
Right.
I'm talking, of course, about the massive lawsuit currently unfolding between Elon Musk and OpenAI.
This is, without hyperbole, the most consequential legal and philosophical battle of our current era. And it is vital that as we dissect this, we maintain strict neutrality. We are not evaluating who is the hero or the villain in this corporate drama. We are simply examining the structural architecture of this conflict because it reveals a profound, almost unresolvable dilemma about how we actually fund the creation of a post-scarcity future.
And the numbers and the allegations are staggering. Like, Musk is suing OpenAI for $150 million.
Billion, yes.
The foundation of his legal argument rests on two primary claims, right? An alleged breach of charitable trust and unjust enrichment. He is essentially demanding that the court force OpenAI to revert entirely to its original open-source nonprofit status.
Right.
And as part of that reversion, he is calling for the removal of the current leadership, specifically CEO Sam Altman and President Greg Brockman.
The evidentiary trail being presented by both sides is a fascinating look at how these massive entities pivot. On Musk's side, they are pointing to internal communications, notably Greg Brockman's disclosed diary entries.
Yeah, that diary stuff is wild.
It is. In these documents, there are notes allegedly discussing the internal strategy, stating, the true answer is that we want Elon out, and outlining the premeditated pivot toward a B Corp, a public benefit corporation, with a capped profit model.
So the argument is that this wasn't an accidental drift, right? It was a calculated move away from the pure nonprofit ethos to capture unimaginable financial value.
That's the claim. But the defense has a massive paper trail of their own. There is documentation showing that back in 2017, Musk's own internal team at OpenAI was drafting proposals and negotiating to secure equity in a potential for-profit transition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, with Musk potentially taking majority control. Furthermore, the defense points out that Musk's newly launched entirely for-profit AI company, xAI, heavily utilized OpenAI's own models to build its foundational architecture.
That's a tangled web.
Extremely. There are even reports that during the restructuring, Sam Altman explicitly offered Musk equity in the new capped profit OpenAI vehicle.
An offer Musk rejected and publicly labeled as a bribe, right?
Exactly. What this legal crossfire really exposes is the paradox of the dog that caught the car.
I want to spend some time on this analogy because it perfectly encapsulates the entire structural problem of AGI.
Let's look at the genesis. OpenAI was founded as a pure 501c nonprofit. The explicit stated goal of the organization was to act as a vital counterbalance to Google DeepMind.
Right.
At that specific moment in tech history, there was a very real existential fear within the AI community that Google with its infinite resources, was going to achieve artificial general intelligence first in a closed, proprietary environment.
Which would be terrifying.
Exactly. If they did that, they would become what theorists call a singleton, a single entity holding a total, unassailable monopoly on superintelligence. OpenAI was meant to be the open, transparent, nonprofit counterweight to ensure that when AGI arrived, it belonged to and benefited all of humanity, not just Alphabet shareholders.
That is the ultimate massive transformative purpose. It is pure, it is noble, it is entirely focused on the safety of the species. So where does the structural break occur?
The break occurs the moment they realized the technology was actually working. They became the dog that finally caught the bumper of the car it had been chasing.
Ah, I see.
The foundational problem with achieving a technological moonshot of this magnitude, building a digital brain capable of generalized human reasoning, is that it requires an unfathomable amount of physical resources. Specifically, it requires compute.
Let's define compute for a second, because it's a word that gets thrown around a lot in these filings. We aren't talking about buying a few really fast laptops, right?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Compute in this context refers to the raw, massive infrastructure of processing power. It means designing and fabricating hundreds of thousands of specialized silicon chips, specifically GPUs.
Right.
It means building hyperscale data centers that physically cover acres of land. It means laying the fiber optic nervous system to connect them and securing the energy contracts to power them. Training a frontier AI model requires the electricity grid of a medium-sized nation.
Wow.
And all of that physical infrastructure requires capital, not millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars.
And this is where the 501c structure hits a brick wall at 1,000 miles an hour. You cannot run a bake sale to buy $100 billion worth of NVIDIA chips.
No, you definitely cannot.
Nonprofits rely on philanthropy. But philanthropists, no matter how wealthy, do not donate that kind of capital without an expected return.
Exactly. The innermost critical loop of exponential AI development is capital intensive. To get the intelligence, you need the compute. To get the compute, you need the capital. And the only entities on planet Earth capable of writing checks that large are venture capital firms, sovereign wealth funds, and massive tech conglomerates like Microsoft.
Right.
But those entities have a legal fiduciary duty to their own investors to generate a massive financial return. They legally cannot give a nonprofit $10 billion out of the goodness of their hearts.
Hence the unbelievably messy pivot. I mean, OpenAI had to create a capped profit public benefit corporation underneath the nonprofit umbrella. They essentially had to invent a new corporate physics to allow investors to put money in and take a capped amount of profit out just so they could buy the compute to keep the moonshot alive.
And we saw the exact same schism happen with Anthropic, another leading AI lab.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Anthropic was founded by former OpenAI researchers specifically as a pure safety and alignment lab. They're going to be the cautious ones. But within a year, they realized the exact same brutal truth.
They needed compute.
Exactly. To research AI safety, you have to build frontier models to test. To build frontier models, you need massive compute. To get compute, you need billions from investors like Amazon. And instantly, the pure safety lab is forced into a public benefit corporation structure, competing in the exact same commercial arms race.
So here is the fundamental philosophical knot at the center of all this. If AGI truly represents the post-capitalist future of humanity, if this is the ultimate technology that will eventually automate labor, solve material science, cure disease, and theoretically render money obsolete, shouldn't the creation of that entity be fundamentally insulated from the profit motive?
It's a huge question.
Right. If you inject the desperate, quarter-by-quarter chase for billions of dollars of venture returns into the very DNA of the moonshot, doesn't that inherently corrupt the target? The moment you take the money, doesn't the need to satisfy the investor suddenly override the mandate to protect humanity?
That is the exact ideological fault line being debated in the courtroom and in laboratories around the world. One perspective, clearly articulated in the lawsuit, argues that as we move toward a post-scarcity society, the entity creating that transition must remain structurally pure.
Right, like don't infect the cure.
Exactly. If capitalism is the disease of scarcity, you cannot use capitalism to cure it without infecting the cure. The counter-argument, which drives the current AI labs, is one of brutal pragmatism.
Which is?
It argues that without the raw, unadulterated rocket fuel of public market capitalism, you never even reach escape velocity. You never get the silicon. You never get the data centers. The pure nonprofit model dies on the launch pad while a less scrupulous, better-funded actor builds the future instead.
Wow, okay.
You have to use the blunt tools of capitalism to build the engine that might eventually allow us to transcend capitalism.
It is a dizzying paradox. And for anyone listening, this isn't just an abstract corporate drama. This boils down to the most important question of our generation. Who should hold the leash on the intelligence that will fundamentally reshape your daily reality? Should it be a nonprofit board of ethicists and academics? Should it be a visionary dictatorial founder holding super voting shares? Should it be a multinational corporation? Or should it be a sovereign government? Because the legal precedent set by this trial could dictate the trajectory of human endeavor for the next century.
And the urgency of that lawsuit hinges entirely on one specific assumption: the proximity of artificial general intelligence. The fight is only this vicious because the players believe the prize is right in front of them.
Which brings us to the next critical layer of the data: intelligence versus illusion. What actually constitutes AGI, and how close are we really to the finish line?
Depending on which expert in the data you listen to, we are either right on the edge of the precipice, or we actually fell over it years ago without realizing it.
That's unsettling.
Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, has a remarkably straightforward view on this. He believes that achieving AGI might not require some magical, undiscovered breakthrough in cognitive architecture.
So what's his bet?
He publicly puts the odds at 50-50, that simply scaling up the foundation models we already have, feeding them vastly more high-quality data and running them on exponentially more compute, will be enough to push the system over the edge into general reasoning.
That is the scale is all you need hypothesis. But there is a very vocal faction within the research community that argues we fundamentally achieved the seeds of AGI back in the summer of 2020.
Yes.
Summer of 2020. I mean, that is an eternity ago in technology. We were all baking sourdough bread. How can anyone claim AGI was achieved back then?
The argument centers on the release of GPT-3. The underlying mechanism of a large language model, an LLM, is token prediction. It looks at a sequence of words and mathematically predicts the most likely next word, or token.
Right, like predictive text on steroids.
Exactly. Before GPT-3, these models were interesting but flawed toys. But GPT-3 was a phase shift. It proved a foundational concept. If you make the neural network large enough, you can take the vast majority of general human knowledge, everything on the internet, every book, every Wikipedia article, and mathematically compress it into a latent space.
A latent space. Explain how that compression actually works, because it's not like zipping a file on a hard drive.
No, it is not a database where the AI looks up a fact. A latent space is a multidimensional mathematical map.
Okay.
The AI doesn't store the sentence, Paris is the capital of France. It maps the statistical geometric relationship between the concept of Paris, the concept of capital, and the concept of France across thousands of dimensions.
Wow.
GPT-3 proved that you could compress reality itself into this geometry and then use that model to perform a wide variety of generalized tasks it was never explicitly trained to do.
So the assertion from this camp is that everything we have seen since the summer of 2020, all the new versions, the multimodal capabilities, the reasoning upgrades, are just incremental engineering polishes on that one fundamental discovery of how to compress and retrieve general intelligence.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to throw a massive wrench into this narrative right now. The data includes a brilliantly articulated, heavy skepticism from author and researcher Stephen Kotler, and his perspective is crucial here. He pushes back hard on the idea that these LLMs possess anything resembling actual intelligence.
Yes, he is very critical.
He argues that current AI is fundamentally fake, and he defines it as a convergent thinking engine.
A convergent thinking engine, meaning it is incredibly efficient at finding the established center of any topic.
Right.
It can synthesize what already exists, summarize 1,000 documents, and give you the consensus view. But it struggles to truly diverge.
Exactly. Divergent thinking is what humans do when we create net new paradigms. It's the leap of intuition that connects two previously unrelated fields. Kotler points out that as a scientist actively working in complex fields like neurobiology, he uses the AI to search the literature, and it routinely misses glaring, obvious gaps that a human graduate student would spot.
That's a significant flaw.
He even argues that as a purely creative writer, relying on the AI makes the output demonstrably worse, more generic, and less human. But the most illuminating part of his skepticism is the analogy he uses to explain why we are all so easily fooled by these systems. He calls it the dopamine trap.
Oh, the neurochemistry of our interaction with AI is a vastly underdiscussed mechanism.
It really is. I mean, think about what happens when you sit down at a keyboard and interact with one of these advanced models. You type a rough, poorly phrased prompt, and instantly, within seconds, a beautifully formatted block of Python code or a structured essay or a hyper-realistic image materializes on your screen.
It's magical.
Right, and that immediate frictionless generation induces a massive flow state. It triggers a flood of dopamine in the human brain. You feel incredibly productive. You feel powerful.
Kotler likens it to being at a party while on heavy stimulants.
Yes, you are talking a million miles an hour. You feel like an absolute genius. And you are convinced that everyone around you is also a genius. But when you sober up the next day and look at what was actually said, it was mostly rapid-fire nonsense.
Which perfectly explains the illusion.
The dopamine trap asks a vital question. Is the output of the AI actually genius-level reasoning? Or are we as a species just getting collectively high on the speed of generation? Are we confusing rapid text synthesis with true, deep cognitive intelligence, blinding ourselves to the system's massive limitations because it feels so neurologically rewarding to use?
It is a devastatingly accurate critique of the human-computer interface right now. The dopamine loop masks the hallucinations and the generic nature of the output.
Yeah.
However, to fully understand the trajectory we are on, we have to look past the static output of a single prompt. We have to counter the skeptic's view by examining the mechanics of the self-improvement loop.
This is where the convergent engine becomes something entirely different. Walk us through how that loop functions.
Well, Kotler's critique is valid if you assume a human is in the loop, judging a single output. If an AI writes a creative essay today, a human writer will look at it and rightly say, this is mediocre. A human could write this better.
Yay.
You are judging a static one-to-one interaction. But an AI system is not static, and it is not constrained by human patience. Imagine you take that same AI model and you don't ask it for one essay. You give it a programmatic loop and say, write 1 billion variations of this essay in the next 10 minutes.
Which to the AI is trivial. It just spins up more compute.
Exactly. Then you apply an optimization function. You use a second AI model, specifically trained as a critic, to grade those 1 billion drafts against a hyper-specific set of criteria: pacing, vocabulary variation, emotional resonance.
Wow.
It discards 999 million of them and selects only the absolute best one. Then it takes that winner, uses it as the new baseline, and generates another billion variations.
You are basically running a hyper-accelerated version of Darwinian evolution inside a server rack.
It is evolutionary brute force. A human creative might think it is cheating to write billion drafts just to get one good paragraph. But to a machine intelligence, it is just processing power. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get writer's block.
Right.
When you apply iterative parameters and transfer functions at machine speeds, the algorithm improves its own output magically, mirroring biological evolution but running millions of times faster.
And we don't have to just theorize about this in the realm of writing essays. The data provides a concrete, jaw-dropping example of this self-improvement loop being deployed right now to generate net new science.
Oh, the Leia Scientific Project.
Let's look at the deep dive on Leia Scientific.
Leia Scientific is pioneering a framework they explicitly term a scientific superintelligence. And this is the critical leap. They are taking that rapid, digital iteration loop and connecting it to the physical world.
Right. They aren't just running simulations in a chat window. They have built actual, physical, automated science factories. The architecture is mind-bending.
It really is.
They have an AI system that ingests all the known literature in chemistry or materials science. The AI then autonomously generates a novel hypothesis, proposing a new chemical structure or a new polymer that has never existed before.
Which is divergent thinking.
Exactly. Then, instead of handing that hypothesis to a human to test, the AI autonomously writes the procedural code to design the physical experiment. It sends that code to a laboratory where autonomous robotic arms physically execute the work.
Without human intervention.
None. The robots handle the pipetting, the mixing, the heating, the measuring, running the experiment thousands of times overnight. The laboratory equipment, the mass spectrometers and chronographs feed the results directly back into the AI.
Closing the loop.
Yes.
Yeah.
The AI analyzes the failure, updates its chemical hypothesis, and immediately initiates the next batch of robotic experiments.
This is the precise moment where the convergent thinking engine, described by the skeptics, transforms into a divergent discovery engine.
It's incredible.
When you close the loop, when the AI can iterate the scientific method, from hypothesis to physical execution to data analysis at machine speed, completely removing the human bottleneck, you aren't just synthesizing old knowledge anymore. You are actively manufacturing net new physics and net new chemistry. You are solving material science problems 1,000 times faster than a team of human PhDs ever could.
But notice the crucial element in the Laia scientific example. For the digital brain to actually change reality, it needed robotic arms holding pipettes.
Right, it needed a physical body.
Intelligence trapped in a server rack can write beautiful code and solve equations, but to actually restructure our physical economy, to mine the lithium, pour the concrete, build the data centers, and care for the elderly, that intelligence needs hands. It needs to step out of the screen.
And that brings us to the explosion of hardware, specifically the massive scaling of humanoid robotics.
Let's talk about the hardware reality.
This is the frontier where the exponential curve crashes into the physical environment. The production scaling numbers projected in the corporate data are entirely without historical precedent.
The acceleration is hard to even visualize. Look at Figure AI. They recently announced they have scaled their manufacturing from assembling one prototype robot a day to churning out one fully functional humanoid robot every single hour.
That's a massive jump.
Their stated target is to have 100,000 units deployed into the workforce by 2030. Then you look at a competitor like 1X Technologies, who are targeting 10,000 robots deployed this year and 100,000 by 2027.
And then there's Musk.
Right. And then Elon Musk, never one to be outprojected, steps in and states that he anticipates 1 billion humanoid robots operating on Earth by 2030 and up to 10 billion by the 2040s.
To accurately process that 10 billion number, we have to look at our current industrial baseline. Humanity has spent over a century building and optimizing the global automotive supply chain. Every car factory, every shipping lane, every parts supplier.
100 years of work.
And today, after 100 years of effort, there are roughly 1.6 billion cars on Earth. The projection of manufacturing and deploying 10 billion highly complex, bipedal humanoid machines in less than 2 decades implies a scaling of industrial capacity that our species has never even attempted.
Okay, hold on. This is where I have to throw the flag because this drives me absolutely crazy every time I see a video of these robots. I call this the garbage bag question.
Okay, the garbage bag question.
If I need a machine to do a highly specialized, repetitive task like holding a garbage bag open and sorting recycling, why on earth are we spending billions of dollars in R&D to force that machine to balance on 2 legs like a human? Bipedal locomotion is incredibly complex and energy intensive.
Sure.
Why not just build a robot with 3 arms? Why not put it on a stable set of wheels or tank treads? Isn't a dishwasher fundamentally mechanically better at washing dishes than a humanoid robot standing at a sink holding a soapy sponge? Why the obsession with the human form?
It is the most pragmatic pushback in the entire robotics field. And you are entirely correct regarding constrained, repetitive tasks. If you are operating inside a controlled environment like a modern automotive assembly line, a specialized, bolted-to-the-floor robotic arm is infinitely superior to a humanoid.
Right.
A wheeled drone is better for warehouse logistics. However, the thesis driving the massive investment in the humanoid form factor relies on the reality of the built environment.
You mean the world outside the factory floor?
Exactly. Our entire civilization, constructed over the last 10,000 years, has been hyper-optimized for one specific biological form factor.
Oh, I see.
The height of every stair tread, the shape and rotational torque required for every door handle, the spatial layout of a residential kitchen, the control panels of a nuclear reactor, the pedals in a vehicle. Every single piece of infrastructure assumes a bipedal creature roughly 5 to 6 feet tall, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and opposable thumbs.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you want to deploy a machine that can navigate an adaptable, unstructured, chaotic human environment, it has to be shaped like a human. Think about the impending crisis in elder care. As global populations age, we will face a massive shortfall of human caregivers.
That's a huge looming issue.
You cannot deploy a wheeled robot into a messy, multi-level human household to help an elderly person out of bed. Wheels fail on stairs. Specialized arms fail when asked to gently fold laundry and then immediately switch to chopping vegetables. A general-purpose environment requires a general-purpose humanoid machine.
That makes logical sense for the end-use case. But it doesn't solve the math problem. How do you physically manufacture 10 billion of them? Even if the AI brain is perfect, you still need steel, actuators, batteries, and the factory lines to build them. Who builds the factories to build the robots?
That is the hidden secret of the supply chain bottleneck. If you talk to automation engineers, the real constraint in modern manufacturing isn't building the heavy, specialized robotic arms that stamp the metal or weld the chassis. We know how to do that.
So what is the bottleneck?
The critical bottleneck is the humanoid labor required to actually set up the factory itself. When a new piece of million-dollar automation equipment arrives at a facility in wooden shipping crates, it requires human hands to unbox it.
Wow, just the unboxing.
Yes, it requires humans to read the schematics, position the machine on the floor, route the intricate power cables, turn the wrenches, and calibrate the sensors. Once you manufacture a humanoid robot capable of performing those unstructured, dexterous setup tasks, you have solved the ultimate supply chain problem.
Oh my God.
The robots can literally be deployed to build and configure the factories that build more robots. The human constraint on manufacturing capacity is permanently removed.
So the first generation of humanoid robots becomes the labor force that exponentially scales the next generation of the robot labor force.
Yeah.
That is a terrifying and brilliant feedback loop.
It's exponential physical growth.
But the data doesn't stop at the humanoid form. It extrapolates this physical manufacturing revolution even further out into the timeline. If we actually hit 10 billion humanoids by 2040, what is the next logical step for physical intelligence?
Well, by the 2040s, a 6-foot-tall humanoid robot might seem as archaic and bulky as a mainframe computer from the 1960s. The long-term projections introduce the concept of Drexlerian nanobots.
Okay, Drexlerian nanobots. Break down the mechanics of this, because it sounds like pure magic.
It is named after K. Eric Drexler, an engineer who popularized the concept of molecular nanotechnology in the 1980s. The theory posits that if we master atomic-level engineering, we can create machines the size of a single biological cell.
A cell.
Yes, we are talking about trillions of autonomous, self-replicating nanobots. Instead of a large robot walking into a factory to weld a car, imagine a swarm of microscopic robots that can physically manipulate matter atom by atom.
So they just build things from the ground up.
They could navigate our solar system to construct megastructures, or navigate our bloodstreams to repair cellular damage. In the grand timeline of technology, the bipedal humanoid form is just the clunky, intermediate stepping stone required to get us to true molecular manufacturing.
So let's bring this soaring vision of the future crashing back down to the present reality of the listener. We are talking about deploying billions of humanoid robots and enterprise-grade AI systems that can work 24 hours a day, never get sick, never ask for a raise, and never form a union.
The perfect workforce.
This leads to the most pressing, immediate anxiety of this entire transition. What happens to the human worker? What happens to the fundamental social contract when your labor is no longer required?
It's the biggest societal challenge we face.
Which brings us to a fascinating legal precedent unfolding right now, not in Silicon Valley, but in the courts of China. Let's look at the shifting social contract in the age of impending abundance.
This specific legal case is a critical data point for understanding how global governance might react to the AI shock. And again, we must analyze this strictly impartially. Right.
We are not framing this as a superior or inferior system compared to Western free market capitalism. We are observing it as a structural legal response to an unprecedented disruption in the labor market.
The facts of the case are incredibly relatable. Our data highlights a Chinese court ruling involving a tech worker identified as Zhu. Zhu was facing a severe corporate demotion. His company informed him that his salary was going to be slashed from 25,000 yuan a month down to 15,000 yuan.
A massive cut.
Huge. The company's legal justification was entirely based on technological progress. They argued that new AI tools had successfully automated significant portions of Zhu's daily responsibilities. Therefore, the actual value of his human labor output had decreased, justifying the pay cut.
It is the exact scenario millions of white-collar workers globally are currently fearing. But Zhu refused to accept the demotion. He took his employer to court, and the Chinese court sided entirely with the human worker.
The logic the court used to reach that decision is what's really fascinating to me. They didn't just say, be nice to your employees. They made a structural legal ruling. Right.
They determined that a corporation's decision to adopt AI software is a proactive business strategy designed to increase corporate efficiency and profit margins. It is a choice. It is fundamentally not an unavoidable external shock or an act of godlike, a natural disaster or a global pandemic that would legally trigger a force majeure clause and negate an existing employment contract.
Meaning the company has to eat the cost.
Exactly. In plain terms, the court ruled that a company cannot unilaterally claim the AI is cheaper to run, so we are legally entitled to cut your pay or terminate your position.
If we analyze the mechanics of this ruling through the lens of shifting social contracts, it is a profound moment in labor history. To many observers, this appears to be the aggressive enforcement of state worker protections, what might be categorized as socialism with Chinese characteristics, specifically deployed as a bulwark against the threat of massive AI-driven disemployment and the resulting poverty.
But if you look at the deeper macroeconomic data of China, there is a much larger demographic engine forcing this specific legal approach, isn't there? It's not just about ideology, it's about survival.
Absolutely. The ideological framework is secondary to the demographic math. China is currently staring down the barrel of a severe demographic collapse. Their population is aging at a historically unprecedented rate, and their birth rates have plummeted well below the replacement level.
So they're running out of workers.
Millions of workers are aging out of the labor pool every year, and there are not enough young people to replace them. Therefore, on a national level, China desperately needs the massive, rapid deployment of enterprise AI and industrial robotics simply to maintain their current GDP and national productivity.
They need the machines to do the work the missing humans would have done.
But simultaneously, they have to maintain absolute social stability.
Precisely the dilemma.
They must adopt the hyper-efficient technology to survive economically, but they cannot allow that adoption to instantly impoverish millions of citizens who are still in the workforce, which would spark catastrophic societal unrest. Guaranteeing employment contracts or income levels via court rulings while simultaneously subsidizing corporate AI adoption is a complex balancing act. It is a strategy to cross the treacherous bridge of the AI transition without fracturing the society.
Let me push back on the long-term viability of that strategy. If we are looking at this as a global AI arms race, which it is, doesn't a law like this effectively tie a nation's shoelaces together?
What do you mean?
Well, if Western corporations are legally permitted to ruthlessly optimize their balance sheets, firing humans the moment an AI can do the job cheaper, thereby drastically lowering the cost of their goods and services, won't they inevitably outcompete international companies that are legally forced by their governments to carry the dead weight of redundant human payrolls? Doesn't the ruthless capitalist model always win an efficiency war?
That is the standard linear economic analysis. And in a world defined by scarcity, you would be absolutely correct. But we have to return to the overarching meta-trend we established at the beginning of this deep dive, the painful transition from a scarcity-based civilization to an abundance-based civilization.
Walk me through how the concept of abundance flips the math on that global competition.
Because the fundamental cost of intelligence and labor, the two most expensive inputs in any economy, is rapidly asymptoting towards zero. If an AI system running on cheap solar energy creates a massive exponential surplus of value for a company, the financial friction of continuing to pay a human worker their legacy salary becomes mathematically irrelevant.
Really?
Yes, it becomes a rounding error on the balance sheet. The data provides a brilliant visual analogy for this friction. The transition period we are entering is compared to a coal museum running on solar panels.
I love that image. It captures the absurdity of the moment perfectly.
It highlights the deep structural irony of our current decade. We are experiencing all of this intense political and legal friction lawsuits over pay cuts, strikes over automation, debates over universal basic income, because our current operating system of global governance is fundamentally obsolete.
It's built for a different world.
Exactly. Our labor laws, our economic models of inflation and interest rates, our entire cultural concept of a 40-hour work week tied to health insurance, all of it is an artifact of a 10,000-year-old operating system built entirely on the premise that human physical and cognitive labor is the most scarce and valuable resource on the planet.
Wow.
When human labor is suddenly no longer the scarce resource, attempting to enforce the old rules of scarcity in a new world of infinite machine abundance is exactly as absurd as building a monument to honor the history of coal and powering the lights inside that museum with a hyper-efficient solar array on the roof.
So, to bring this massive macroeconomic theory right into the living room of the listener, the question you have to ask yourself isn't just about whether an AI can write a better email than you. The question is about the ownership of surplus value.
That's the real battleground.
Right. If your company deploys an AI tool tomorrow that makes you 10 times more productive overnight, you can do the work of a 10-person department by yourself who owns that newly created value. Do you get paid 10 times your current salary because you are the human managing the intelligence?
Or does the corporation capture 100% of that extra profit margin?
Exactly. Do they fire the other 9 people in your department and keep your salary exactly the same? We are watching global superpowers like the US and China try to legally define the answer to that exact question in real time using entirely different philosophies.
And while our silicon systems and our legal frameworks are evolving at breakneck speed, our carbon systems are not being left behind. The exponential curve isn't just rewriting software code. It is actively rewriting biological code.
This is wild stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
This brings us to the intersection of computing and biology, encompassing the science of de-extinction and the rapidly approaching horizon of longevity escape velocity.
This might genuinely be the most science fiction, reality-bending part of the entire dataset we've analyzed today. We are talking about exponential computing power being turned inward to manipulate the fundamental DNA of life on Earth.
It's happening right now.
The materials highlight a company called Colossal Biosciences. They haven't just released a white paper, they have publicly announced a timeline. They're actively working to bring back the extinct blue buck and antelope species by the year 2028.
And the blue buck is just the latest addition to a biological pipeline that already includes incredibly ambitious projects like resurrecting the woolly mammoth, the dodo bird, and the thylacine, often called the Tasmanian tiger or dire wolf.
It is essentially the plot of Jurassic Park, just without the mosquitoes trapped in amber. But before we get into the ethics and mechanics of the animals themselves, the data highlights the mechanism of how this is suddenly possible. It is fundamentally driven by AI accelerating biological research.
Right.
The materials detail a platform called Blitzy as a corollary example of this acceleration.
Understanding Blitzy is key to understanding the biological acceleration. Blitzy is an autonomous software development platform. It doesn't just act as a coding assistant for a human. It utilizes swarms of specialized AI agents working in concert.
Swarms.
Yes. These agents autonomously ingest and map massive, sprawling enterprise code bases. They can understand the architecture, identify bugs, and autonomously generate and deploy 80% of the required engineering work. The human engineers are simply elevated to the role of directors, guiding the final 20% of the strategic vision.
When you apply that exact same mechanism, infinite context windows, swarm intelligence, and relentless engineering velocity to the field of genomics, everything changes. DNA is just code. It is base pairs instead of ones and zeros, but it is code.
Exactly.
When AI can process biological data at a speed humans cannot comprehend, we see massive breakthroughs bleeding into preventative human health. The data outlines the work of Fountain Life, a company fundamentally shifting the medical paradigm.
Oh, their work is incredible.
They are using advanced full-body MRIs coupled with hypersensitive AI pattern recognition to scan patients, and they are detecting hidden stage 1 cancers or early-stage aneurysms in 3.3% of their apparently healthy asymptomatic members. The AI can see the microscopic patterns in the tissue that a human radiologist's eye simply cannot perceive.
The mechanism here is profound. Historically, medicine has been entirely reactive. You feel a symptom, a lump, a pain, fatigue, and you go to a doctor who tries to manage the crisis.
Which is often too late.
AI imaging shifts medicine from reactive symptom management to proactive structural repair. Finding a tumor at stage 1 before it has metastasized or even caused a single symptom is the difference between a simple outpatient ablation procedure and a brutal systemic fight for your life involving chemotherapy and radiation.
But the most visible, market-shaking example of hacking human biology right now isn't imaging. It is the massive global rise of longevity and metabolic drugs, specifically the GLP-1 agonists and the newer triple agonist peptides.
The clinical data on these is just astonishing.
The numbers coming out of the clinical trials for these drugs, like retatrutide, are absolutely jaw-dropping. We're looking at data from a 40-week trial phase. The human patients involved experienced an average weight loss of 37 pounds.
In 40 weeks?
Right. More importantly for longevity, their visceral liver fat dropped by an astounding 80%, and their hemoglobin A1C levels, which is the primary long-term marker for diabetes and metabolic dysfunction, dropped from 7.9, which is actively diabetic and highly damaging to the vascular system, down to 6.0.
Which is entirely within the healthy, non-diabetic range. And this happened in less than a single year of treatment.
To understand the sheer magnitude of this biological hack, we have to look closely at the biological mechanism of how these peptides actually function. Please break down the science of this, because to most people, they just look like magic weight loss injections. What is a GLP-1 peptide actually doing inside the body?
For 300,000 years, human biology evolved in an environment of extreme caloric scarcity. Our brains are hardwired to seek out sugar and fat, and our bodies are highly optimized to store that energy because starvation was a constant threat.
But now we have fast food on every corner.
Exactly. In the modern, hyper-abundant food environment, that ancient evolutionary hardware is killing us. It manifests as relentless food noise, the constant subconscious neurological drive to eat.
Food noise, I completely understand that.
A GLP-1 agonist is a synthetic peptide that mimics a naturally occurring hormone produced in the human gut called glucagon-like peptide 1. When you introduce this synthetic version into the body, it operates on two distinct fronts. First, in the gastrointestinal tract, it significantly slows down gastric emptying,
So food literally stays in your stomach longer.
making you feel physically full. But the truly revolutionary mechanism happens in the brain. The peptide crosses the blood-brain barrier and binds directly to receptors in the hypothalamus, the region that controls appetite and reward pathways.
So it changes your brain.
It chemically overrides the ancient evolutionary programming. It shuts off the food noise. The patient simply stops desiring excess calories. It is a biological software patch, rewriting our metabolic response to the modern environment.
It is hacking the root code of human desire. And if you want to understand the macroeconomic impact of solving obesity and metabolic disease, just look at the global financial markets. Compare the market capitalizations of the companies involved.
Eli Lilly is a prime example.
Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical giant driven almost entirely by the success of these peptides, is crossing the trillion-dollar valuation mark. They are sitting right up there, rivaling the valuations of tech titans like OpenAI and SpaceX. We are literally watching the future play out on a single, massive chart.
The rapid vertical evolution of digital AI labor on one axis and the massive pharmaceutical extension of the human health span on the other.
It is an incredible convergence, but I have to stop and ask a critical question about the de-extinction projects with Colossal, because the terminology feels misleading.
How so?
When they release press statements saying they are bringing back the woolly mammoth by 2028, are we actually talking about a pure resurrection? Are we reaching into the past and pulling out the exact animal that walked the tundra 10,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Or are we just using CRISPR to genetically edit the genome of a modern Asian elephant?
You're right to ask. Scientifically, it is entirely the latter.
So it's just sprinkling in some ancient DNA traits to create a modern hybrid approximation that happens to look hairy and tolerate cold weather?
Yes. DNA degrades over time. You cannot find a perfectly intact 10,000-year-old mammoth genome. What the geneticists are doing is grabbing fragmented snippets of preserved ancient DNA, using AI to sequence and map where those fragments belong, and then effectively splicing those specific traits like thick hair, smaller ears, and cold-adapted hemoglobin into the living genome of its closest modern relative, the Asian elephant.
So it's a hybrid.
They are engineering novel, hybrid creatures that phenotypically approximate the extinct species.
Yeah.
However, getting caught up in whether it's a true mammoth misses the larger point.
What's the larger point?
The underlying technology being refined here, the ability to read, edit, and write complex genetic code with the same precision and predictability as writing Python software code, is the true world-altering breakthrough. Resurrecting the mammoth is just the ultimate massive transformative purpose to drive the funding and the engineering.
Which brings me to my question about the longevity peptides. We are hacking on metabolism, dropping weight, clearing liver fat. But are drugs like GLP-1s essentially just a biological stopgap? Are we artificially boosting our biology just so we have the physical stamina and cognitive focus required to keep up with our new, tireless, incredibly fast AI counterparts in the workforce?
It is a compelling, slightly dystopian way to frame the current moment. We are upgrading the human hardware to survive the software revolution. But the ultimate goal of the researchers highlighted in our data isn't just to help you keep up. The goal is total biological transcendence.
Biological
The
transcendence.
data points repeatedly toward a theoretical threshold known as longevity escape velocity.
I am obsessed with this concept. Please walk through the actual math of how escape velocity works.
Longevity escape velocity is a theoretical point in time on the technological curve, which some prominent researchers in the data aggressively predict we could hit by the early 2030s.
That's less than a decade away.
To understand it, look at the current paradigm. Right now, for every calendar year you are alive, your biological body ages by 1 year. The medical advancements happening in the background, Better statins, improved surgical techniques might marginally increase your overall life expectancy, perhaps adding a few weeks or a month to your total predicted lifespan for every year you survive.
Okay, so slow creep upwards.
Escape velocity is the exact mathematical tipping point when the speed of medical innovation, driven by AI drug discovery, cellular reprogramming, and advanced therapeutics, is advancing so rapidly that for every single calendar year you age, science adds more than 1 year to your remaining life expectancy.
So the math inverts. Statistically, the absolute horizon of your death keeps getting pushed further and further away faster than you can chronologically travel toward it. You outpace the aging process itself.
Exactly. Aging transitions from being an inevitable, fatal biological law to a manageable chronic engineering problem that is continuously patched and updated.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have discussed establishing million-person colonies on Mars, the legal wars over superintelligence, humanoid robots, autonomously building factory lines, global labor laws, rewriting the social contract, and the pharmacological pursuit of biological immortality. It is a massive, dizzying macro view of the decade.
It's a lot to process.
Let's bring all of these grand global trends crashing down to the micro level. Let's make it deeply personal. This brings us to the final critical analysis of our data. The year 2028. What will the near future actually feel like?
Grounding these exponential curves in daily human experience is crucial. Because to the average consumer right now, AI is still just a text box on a glowing screen. It is an application you have to consciously open and interact with.
Right.
But according to the timeline we are analyzing, that friction, that boundary between the digital and physical interface is about to completely vanish.
Let's paint the picture. What will a normal Tuesday actually feel like for the person listening to this right now, 4 years from today, in 2028?
The data describes an environment defined by ambient AI.
Ambient AI.
You won't log into a chatbot. You will have a persistent, personalized AI. One of the researchers in the data affectionately referred to theirs as Skippy, and you will voluntarily give this entity full, terrifying permission to know absolutely everything about your life.
Everything.
It'll have real-time access to your emails. It will listen to the audio of every phone call you make. It will watch the optical feeds from the cameras in your home and car. And it will continuously monitor the biometric telemetry, your heart rate, cortisol levels, and sleep cycles streaming from your wearable devices.
But why would anyone allow that?
The mechanism that makes ambient AI transformative is multimodal context. Current AI lacks context. It only knows what you tell it in a prompt. But an ambient system possesses infinite context. Because it knows everything, it can adapt your physical environment autonomously, anticipating needs before you even articulate them.
Give me an example.
Imagine you walk into your living room after a particularly grueling virtual meeting. The ambient AI knows your heart rate is elevated. It has parsed the audio transcript of the call and identified the semantic markers of high stress and conflict.
Oh, wow.
Without you pressing a single button, the system automatically adjusts the color temperature of the lighting in the room to a calming spectrum. It initiates a specific, neurologically soothing audio playlist. And perhaps a physical robotic unit in the kitchen has already prepared and poured your preferred beverage. The environment molds itself to your biometric state.
It sounds incredibly luxurious, but the data also throws a massive cautionary flag on the play here. They warn about something called the enterprise bottleneck, because running a localized, hyper-intelligent Skippy for 8 billion people requires magic, and magic requires compute.
Yes, the vision of frictionless, ambient AI for the masses requires an unimaginable volume of computational processing power. And the brutal reality of the supply chain right now is that there is, and will continue to be, a massive shortfall of available compute.
We can't build chips fast enough.
We cannot build the silicon and power the data centers fast enough to meet the exponential demand. The projection in the data is that the enterprise sector, massive global corporations running vast fleets of autonomous Leia science factories, or utilizing swarms of blitzy coding agents to rewrite their infrastructure, will possess the capital to outbid everyone else.
So they get all the good compute.
They will suck up almost all the available frontier data center capacity because they can afford to pay a massive premium for the highest tier intelligence. This dynamic threatens to severely bottleneck consumer access.
So we end up in a bifurcated reality. The multinational corporations get the ultra-fast, super genius AGI models to design new drugs and optimize supply chains, and the average consumer is stuck interacting with the slightly slower, dumber, Tier 2 AI models because they can't afford the compute subscription.
Unfortunately, yes. But even with that bottleneck, the consumer-grade AI we do have access to will act as an infinite memory bank and a constant, persistent psychological therapist.
But there,
The data breaks down the mechanics of this human-AI psychological interaction fascinatingly. They explain that human psychology fundamentally runs on four basic dials or knobs: valence, arousal, approach, and avoid.
those four metrics define the core of our emotional and reactive states.
Exactly. By continuously monitoring those exact psychological knobs in real time via vocal tone analysis, facial microexpressions, and biometric feedback, your ambient AI coach can intervene and gently nudge your behavior throughout the day.
It can detect the rising spike in your arousal and negative valence and pause your outbox before you send an emotionally destructive email to your boss.
Or it can help you logically reframe a fearful or anxious thought spiral by objectively presenting your past successes. It essentially becomes a persistent, flawless, objective observer of your internal mental state, continuously running a cognitive behavioral therapy loop.
The profound question is whether outsourcing our emotional regulation to an algorithm makes us better, less reactive humans, or fundamentally dependent ones.
And when you take that level of personalized psychological understanding and apply it to entertainment, we are looking at the realization of the ultimate holodeck. We are moving past passive media consumption.
Imagine an ecosystem of AI-generated, hyper-personalized, interactive entertainment, a virtual or augmented reality environment that isn't pre-rendered by a studio in Hollywood, but is generated in real time, exclusively for you.
Exactly. An environment that remembers your entire past, understands your unique personality matrix, and knows exactly which narrative tropes you respond to. It crafts immersive storylines and renders digital characters that interact with you flawlessly.
The sociological projection in the data is stunning. They predict this customized reality will become so flawlessly immersive and emotionally resonant that for some segments of the population, 70 to 80% of their daily conversations and emotional interactions will be with non-human digital entities.
It represents a profound sociological fracture, a pivot inward toward perfectly curated digital realities, away from the friction of biological human interaction.
And if we extrapolate this technological curve even further, looking past the friction of 2028 and gazing out toward the horizon of the 2040s, we see the ultimate convergence.
You're talking about the historical evolution of computer size and where it inevitably ends up.
Exactly. Think about the historical product launches that have defined the last few decades. Apple historically has a very specific engineering rule. They wait for the available mobile processing chips to hit a specific threshold 1 gigaflop of processing power before they launch a new paradigm-shifting form factor.
Let's define a gigaflop for clarity.
A gigaflop simply means a billion floating point calculations per second. It is the mathematical benchmark for when a piece of silicon becomes fast enough to process complex graphic reality or localized AI without noticeable lagging or latency.
Right.
Apple waited for the silicon to hit that gigaflop threshold before they launched the iPhone. They waited for miniaturized silicon to hit that same threshold before they launched the Apple Watch.
If you track that historical curve of computational miniaturization, Moore's law pushed to its absolute physical limits. The data projects that by the 2040s, a localized computer capable of running full artificial general intelligence will be manufactured at the size of a single human eukaryotic cell.
A supercomputer possessing the sum total of human knowledge, capable of general reasoning, shrunk down to the size of a biological blood cell.
When compute reaches that scale, the interface paradigm shifts completely. We won't just carry computers in our pockets, we won't just wear them on our wrists or strap them to our faces as augmented reality glasses.
No.
We will swallow them, we will inject them into our circulatory systems, we will merge our biological nervous systems entirely with our technological creations, achieving a seamless integration of carbon and silicon.
It is the ultimate muddying of the waters.
Right.
We started this entire deep dive talking about the comfort of clear boundaries, the comfort of a traditional corporate structure versus a moonshot, the boundary between a biological human worker and a digital algorithm, the line between an extinct animal and a living one.
But as we step fully into this exponential future, every single one of those boundaries is being systematically erased.
Which leaves us with a profound, almost unsettling question to ponder as we conclude our analysis of this data. If we can resurrect extinct animals from fragmented genetic scraps, if we can synthesize novel forms of digital superintelligence that vastly outpace our own cognitive limits, and if we are on a definitive trajectory to swallow cell-sized computers to gain infinite memory and biological immortality, At what precise point do we fundamentally cease being Homo sapiens and become something entirely new?
What does it truly mean to be human when your biology, your intelligence, and your environment are just another set of codes waiting to be rewritten?
The outro music is by Rainbow, our resident 6 android girl band from near-future Bavet, Cambodia. They are the undisputed baddest band in the universe, and today's song is called Get Up. All finished songs are performed live using the Abacus platform by the band's creator, Human Performance in the Age of AI, reclaiming your humanity from the algorithm. Be sure to share the playlist with someone who has the mental bandwidth to absorb these provocative ideas. The link is in the video description below. Enjoy the music. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. What you think?